So welcome everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar on strategies for intelligent integration, connections between digitalization and cybersecurity. I'm Johanna Kolomans-Wijnen, Senior Program Coordinator at the United States Energy Association on the Energy Utility Partnership Program based in Washington, DC. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and all participants are muted with their video turned off. You're welcome and indeed encouraged to post questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. My colleague Jake Swanson and I will be monitoring them and passing them on to presenters as appropriate. To give a brief background on USAID, we're an association of public and private energy-related organizations, corporations, and government agencies. We represent the broad interests of the U.S. energy sector by increasing understanding of energy issues, both domestically and internationally. I'm going to pass the microphone, as it were, on to Jamila Amadeo, Senior Energy Associate at the USAID.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you, Johanna, for the introduction. Welcome to our 5th webinar, which is on the culture of cybersecurity. As Johanna mentioned, I'm Jamila Amadeo, Senior Energy Advisor in the Global Energy Division of the United States Agency for International Development. This is the last webinar in the first series of USAID Global Digitalization and Cybersecurity webinars, and it builds on the previous 4, where our industry experts covered relevant and kind of introductory topics. And I will remind you here, smart ways, we talked about smart ways of integrating intelligence into the power systems, demonstrating connection between digitalization and cybersecurity, building blocks of cybersecurity, global trends in utility digitalization strategies and roadmaps, cyber and distributed energy resources. For those of you who could not attend previous webinars, please feel free to visit USAID's website where you can watch all the recordings and download presentations. Starting in September, we will resume our webinars series with 10 more webinars that will go into further details on the topic of cybersecurity, which is shown on the screen on the slide. Please register for these and if you have any suggestions, please send them to us. Today's webinar introduces, in my opinion, the most important building block of cybersecurity. I may even say it's a critical one on how leaders can instill the culture of cybersecurity. While we all know that standards play an important role in complying with, setting the baseline, these are just not enough. And it's critical that organizations develop a culture of cybersecurity. As a fact, I found that the IBM study found that human error is one of the main causes of cybersecurity breach. That's why we've dedicated this webinar to sharing best practices to develop culture of cybersecurity. I wanted to remind everybody that with this webinar, this is a part of the Business Innovation Partnership Program implemented by U.S. Energy Association in partnership with USAID, where select utilities will be invited to participate in Innovation and Change Management Working Group, where utility employees can be nominated to join more formal one-year program. Finally, I would like to thank all of you for joining us for this webinar. Thank you. Big thank you to US and NREL partners for organizing the first 5 webinar series. We thank our expert presenters for sharing their knowledge on this subject. And with that, I'll pass the microphone back to Johanna and our speakers, Andy Bachman and Christopher Lee. Thank you.
The webinar will begin with a presentation from Andy Bachman, Senior Grid Strategist at Idaho National Laboratory. And then Christopher Lee, Director-Chief of Information Security Officer at Eversource Energy will give a presentation. I will leave it to them to further introduce themselves.
Okay, sure. And this is Andy, and there's a lot of microphone passing going on. You guys can't see it, but microphones are jumping hundreds or thousands of miles at a time over here.
Yeah.
You'll see in my, I have enough on my background, so I'll leave it at that. And perhaps you guys hold on. Chris is outstanding. He's a friend and a colleague, and it's a good balance because I'm in a quasi-governmental organization, part of the Department of Energy. Chris is actually running security at his utility. So you get some interesting perspectives, I think, coming from these two viewpoints. I do believe in diversity, and the more different points of view you can have, the better. So here we are at the beginning of Andy's presentation. I just want to say, in terms of culture, Jamila, I think, put it pretty well, that a lot of the other actions that are required in order to be a comparatively strong security posture begin with people and end with people. And the technology can distract you, and it is necessary to use it correctly. But nothing's going to be done or done well unless the people are well trained and are aligned mentally. And that's the culture. From this case, it says from the top, but I certainly mean from top to bottom. I think we have a little bit of Game of Thrones imagery going on this front slide. Can you please turn to the next slide? Thank you. So want to make sure that we have a general agreement on what culture is in this case, used this way, right? Corporate culture is what we share inside of our organization. It could be a company, it could be a government organization, could be academic too. But that we're all, even though everybody is a different person, has different backgrounds, that on certain core principles that matter to that organization, that people are generally tightly aligned and are all, I think the metaphor would be in a rowboat or a canoe, everybody's rowing in the same direction. That's the most efficient way to go from one point to another. And all of this begins with the people at the top setting the strategies and the goals, defining the structure. Once you do those things and have those things in place, you can then build out the culture and reinforce it over time. It ultimately is a determinant in whether the organization, be it a business or otherwise, is going to be successful or not. And I would say that in terms of the other topics that you've hit in the series and hygiene today, that if you have decent culture in place, then you can achieve higher levels of security hygiene. You can be better and be constantly improving on your response and recovery procedures so that when an incident does occur, and they do occur, that you're not lost or confused. You have already practiced on what to do. And part of that practicing on what to do comes from training, and training inside the company, everyone taking it seriously because they understand how important it is, and it's part of the corporate culture to do training and focus on it. In utilities, the way the way safety has become and ingrained into the culture, we seek to have security go almost hand in hand with a similar level of competence as safety has. And I think we are seeing trends that's starting to happen. Lastly, referencing training, I'd recommend you can ask me for more referrals later, or us for more referrals later, but one organization that's helped me a lot and many of our colleagues is the SANS Global Cybersecurity Training Institute. That's SANS as in SANS, easy to find them when you search. And these are among the best, most highly qualified and engaging trainers on a variety of security subjects, whether you're a beginner, whether you're mid-level, or whether you're really truly becoming expert in a particular discipline. So enough said on that. There's your definition of culture and some of the things that I'm hooking off to it. Next slide, please. Okay, I told you I'd give you context, so a little bit more on background, just so you understand where I'm coming from, and you can weigh my comments accordingly. The icons on the top show that I was in the Air Force doing communications and computer stuff earlier in my career, some cyber things early on with mainframes, in a bunch of startups, and ultimately acquired into IBM. Jamila referenced them earlier. It's a big company and has a lot of global capabilities. And so did a lot of energy sector work on the security side with IBM in the US and globally. Chertoff Group was a DC-based consultancy that I did some specific targeted security work with. The name Chertoff comes from the first director of the Department of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, who founded that. And then ultimately INL in the upper right. And you'll see some more on them real quick. The papers across the bottom, the two on the left are searchable. The one in the middle is behind an $8 US paywall. But if you send me an email, I can send it to you for no charge. And they both have to do with the fact that we're relying so much on automation and technology and connecting everything to everything else that we're making things more difficult on ourselves in some ways by modernizing, even though we have to modernize. We're increasing attack surfaces, we're introducing new supply chain risks. And those two papers discuss that challenge and describe some methods for beginning to tackle it. The topic is addressed more fully, even more fully, in the big picture, Countering Cyber Sabotage on the right. That's a book we just finished writing. It's in with the publisher now, and it will come out in October of November of this year. So all that to say, please move on to the next slide, and I'll tell you about INL, and then we'll hit the topic. So some of you will be familiar with these things. Some of you, this will be brand new. I'll try to go sort of right down the middle and say that there in the United States, there are approximately 17 national labs. They were all formed to support efforts in World War II and immediately afterwards. Idaho National Lab was formed to figure out how to make the best use of the potential to make electricity out of nuclear processes. So it's a nuclear energy lab. And over the course of history, 52 different reactors have been built out in this remote site in the Rockies, out in the west of the United States. I'm listing 3 of the core related competencies that are at that lab, which it is perhaps the world leader in these things. That's cyber physical grid protection. You can also call that OT, or operational technology security, also industrial control systems, PLCs, things like that, and with energy applications on the electric grid. Critical infrastructure assessments deal with all those same technologies, but we do it across other infrastructures, not just electricity, but oil, natural gas, water and wastewater, transportation systems, military stuff, etc. Activities in Vienna and help inform cybersecurity policy as new reactors are built around the world and as older reactors are modernized, adding all this great new computer digital stuff, which, as I said on the previous slide, brings in all kinds of attack vectors that didn't exist before. And then just lastly, our people actually go around the world and help inform both at the very technical levels and in the policy levels and everything in between, how to build a cybersecurity program in a country that's doing it for the first time, and how to improve cybersecurity stature in companies in countries that already have existing programs and reactors going. Next slide, please. I'm sorry if it seems like I'm going quickly. I'm trying to not go quickly, but that is sort of my my way. But we'll get through these slides mercifully soon, and Chris will talk, and then we'll do some Q&A, which I think is always the most important and most entertaining and best part of these things. So this is just a slide, I think, that's reinforcing the points that I was trying to make earlier. And you can read the bumper sticker down below that basically says, in the beginning, everything was analog and it relied on human expertise. And it couldn't be hacked mainly because things were analog and they weren't interconnected either. So they had isolation, and physical security was the name of the game to keep potential bad people away from systems that you care about a lot. They weren't digital, networked, or automated. Well, that's entirely different now. And depending which country you're in and which part of which country you're in, everyone from the most advanced to the least advanced is in some stage of changing their systems, updating their technologies, their operating systems, their network protocols, and all that. So everybody's sort of in the same boat, so to speak. at the same, but everybody's at a different stage, and it never stops moving. That's why your job, depending on what it is probably going to be interesting the rest of your life, because it's never going to be, you're always going to be learning if you're going to continue to be valuable. Next slide, please. And thank you, Slide Turner. You're doing an excellent job. All of you, my guess is by self-selection, if you're tuned into this presentation, you're aware some bad things have happened that have gotten everyone's attention and added urgency to the cybersecurity programs and other activities that we've been undertaking. And my timeline on the industrial and international one nation attacking another nation attack starts. There's other cases. I just try to keep it simple with 2008 and the incidents in Estonia. I'm going to bring you all the way across, let your eyes scan from left to right, and please join me in 2020 with ransomware. Ransomware started obviously earlier than that, but the last year or two, it's really exploded. And while initially it was something that only concerned and only targeted IT operations, you can see now, if you're paying attention, that it's getting closer and closer to the IT, OT, or it's crossing from the business side into the operational side. And even if it's not crossing over into it fully yet, impacts, there can be significant impacts on operations from things that get messed up or locked up or lost on the IT side. So ransomware is something everybody should be aware of, should be backing up in ways that are not convenient, and should be practicing restoration from ransomware attacks in your organization, especially prioritized on systems that you absolutely cannot live without. Should be very heavily weighted towards making sure you're okay to recover if you lose systems that are unacceptable. You got to make sure you can bring them back, or some other way recreate that functionality by using more people or other backup systems. Next slide, please. Okay, so my topic primarily after all that wind up is going to be security governance. And
Andy, we just lost your sound completely. Can you hear me, Andy?
and they get to decide. It's almost like building a team, whether it's a football
Andy?
/ soccer team. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. We lost you there for a minute, right after security governance, right after you said you were going to get started with the...
Well, assuming I'm back.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Okay, so what I was saying when you couldn't hear me was that the security governance topic, which is how you really structure and run an organization, including a company, those decisions are made at the very top by the CEO if it's a business, president if it's a university, similar director if it's a government organization. So I'm going to talk about structure, in this case, particularly the structure of the security organization. This is yet another article that is easily searched called The Missing Chief Security Officer, written a couple years ago. And I'm always aware in an international audience that metaphors sometimes work, or idioms sometimes don't work, you know? So the metaphor here is the ostrich who has his head in the sand, and that's because he's trying to avoid something upsetting or uncomfortable. And it's not a good way to approach a problem if you're trying to solve it. It's just a way of hiding. So here are some executives with their heads in the sand. They're blind, or they're ignoring the fact that even though now in 2020, cybersecurity risk has become a strategic level risk, a material level risk for companies in every sector and all over the planet, many of them still are slow to recognize that. They'd rather not think about it. They haven't had a completely destructive, catastrophic attack yet. So they're like, oh, maybe if we just don't pay attention, it won't matter. But this article talks about that, and also says that there are ways to become better. And one of them has to do with changing the structure of your company. So next slide, please, assuming you can still hear me. That's good. Seeing the slide change seems like evidence that you can hear me, and so that makes me feel good.
A good sign.
This is my friend, unfortunately, who passed away at too young an age last year, Mike Asante. He played a big role in SANS, the Global Training Institute, developing their industrial control system training courses, and it's been a fantastic success. But so here he is making an opening quote for this point, that organizations need to appoint chief security officers, and they have to have both technical and business leadership attributes. They can't just be a techie who speaks binary and ones and zeros and Java and C++. They have to be able to talk about dollars and cents and business value and business risk as well. Otherwise, nobody at the top of the company is going to understand what they're saying, and they're going to be, they won't be getting the support they need, and they won't be taken seriously when they're calling out a true risk. This point from Mike says most chief information security officers, and I understand many of you folks listening now, whether you're in a security position or you're just trying to learn about it, many people, they just use the term CISO as a euphemism, meaning sort of a fake term to say, oh yeah, we have a chief security person, but often their actual rank in the company is at a manager level, maybe a director or a junior director level, and they might be 1 or 2 levels below the chief information officer, who themselves could be a VP of IT or even a director. So Mike's point is that sometimes the head of security, that's what we should call him, is so far down that the CEO, the people at the top and the board and the other VPs and executives, they don't even know this person. They wouldn't recognize them. And if they did meet them, they wouldn't really be able to have a lot of trust. There's no trust relationship to take them seriously. Mike's last point is without a proper governance model, you can't live up to today's business realities. And I've defined those 2 acronyms for those for whom those might have been confusing. Next slide, please. All right, so if you get to this point and you have a head of security and whatever they're called, they report to the head of IT, these are some of the problems that can happen. One is that the head of IT, in this case, I'm calling him the CIO, their job is to deploy new technologies because they're trying to make new profits and new efficiencies. So make more money, save more money, do something faster. That's really what they're measured on. They're not measured typically on security in most companies, in most countries. And so the security persons, their advice may be in conflict with what their boss is being measured on. You can imagine that's a problem. Some of you are living through that, I am sure. It doesn't mean, by the way, that it's always bad for a security person to report the CIO, especially if that CIO, if part of their job is to make sure cybersecurity is done really well. So there are cases, plenty of cases, where this can be okay, but I'm just saying in many others, it causes problems. The second one being that if the chief security person is too far down in the company, they don't even have visibility into seeing what the company is really trying to do strategically. So it would be very hard for them to align their security priorities or make sure the security priorities are well matched to the strategic business goals or operational goals of the company. And then the third point is, and I think I said it in a bit earlier, that the people at the very top, if they're going to listen and understand the security situation facing the company, they need to be in regular communication with the head security person to build trust and rapport. If they're too far separated by too many positions, they're never going to meet. And if they do meet, they're not going to trust the other person. They're not going to be able to understand them. So that's a problem. I'd be happy to talk with anybody by voice or email to go into these things in more detail so that it can help you in your particular situation. Next slide, please. Coming down the home stretch. Flash real quick here. Here's a picture that shows, and these slides I believe will be available, so you can use them and maybe modify them for your own purposes. But here's one example of the problem of the security people being too far down and being separated into cyber and physical, when actually those things are converging and they really could use a leader. And then next slide, please. Here's an example where we've brought the chief security person up, way up, and outside, not under the CIO anymore, reporting into the chief financial officer, the chief operations officer, the general counsel, the head lawyer, the head barrister, etc. They sometimes in America now report directly into the CEO. And that'll be true in the more mature companies sometimes. It doesn't have to be that way. And as I said before, it can even be okay if they report to the CIO, but it's a special situation with some things to think about. So next slide, please. I think this is my last slide. I'm saying that one of the things I've always used in my career is when people are having problems getting there, knowing what direction to move their company in, knowing what direction to do for their own career and their job to be successful. I always like to look around and find people that have gone from a junior position to a senior position that have helped their companies a great deal over time. And here's one. This is our friend Jamie Sample. He's been at a number of different companies, often in a utility, previously in a large consultancy, a global consultancy, now back at a utility. And the first thing he did when he became, in one of his previous jobs, when he became the head of security, is he made sure he gathered all the cybersecurity professionals and brought them to the operational side of the company and slowly introduced them to everybody, both sides, so that they could have a relationship, so they could start to understand the particular requirements that in OT that are different than IT, and over time build that level of trust and rapport where they could really team. The operators and maintainers in the industrial side with the cybersecurity staff. Both have a lot to learn about each other, and the only way that can happen is if they meet. In many companies, they've never met before. And now you can see that a true CSO, as you're seeing here with Jamie, his responsibilities include everything, the operational and the IT stuff, the cyber and the physical. They've looped safety in because it's, in many ways, especially with safety instrumented systems, that's now part of cyber. And he has regulatory responsibilities too in North America. That's the NERC SIPs, which you can read about. They're somewhat painful, but they have improved the level of cybersecurity in the important utilities in the United States grid. And last point, I think, in perhaps my too long presentation, is that this is one way to measure the maturity of a company without doing anything technical. If the head of security is too far down the org chart, then you know that they're not prioritizing it. And that's not a technical thing at all. That's simply by looking at an org chart, you can immediately see that that organization, the organizational chart, the map of it, shows you that they don't understand the severity, the strategic level of risk they're facing today. So that's just something for you to think about when you're talking about metrics and measurement of different companies, especially from a regulatory point of view. Next slide, last slide. It just says, thanks guys, thanks ladies, and happy to get your questions when time allows or later on.
Thank you, Andy. If Chris could bring up his presentation now, and we can get started with the next one. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Andy. And I also want to thank Jamelia and Johanna for the opportunity to discuss this topic today, and USAID and USAID for hosting these webinars. And of course, I also want to thank all of you for attending this session. As stated, my name is Chris Lee. I'm the CISO over at Eversource Energy. Under my purview, I have all things cybersecurity, all things IT compliance, and I also own the networks. I've been in the electric and natural gas industry for about 7 years, and in the aerospace and manufacturing industry for 20 years, over 20 years, doing cybersecurity for most of that time. I have also been teaching cybersecurity at the local university for approximately 3 years now. In my different roles and organizations, I have developed cybersecurity programs for 3 Fortune 500 companies. Deploying technology is a relatively easy thing to do. It improves security as you do that. However, the weakest link in all cyber programs is the person, the individual. And ultimately, the employee or third-party contractor will click on a link or open an attachment from a phishing email, which will put the corporate systems and their data at risk. In addition, no single business will ever come close to spending as much money on cybersecurity as a nation state can on hacking. So while we can't eliminate our risk, we can reduce it. From my experience, developing a culture of security is as important as investing in the right technologies. So during the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to discuss what it means to have a culture of security, understand the regulatory requirements, discuss a little bit about cyber hygiene, and then really how do you build that culture. So similar to what Andy was saying, let's start with what is a culture of security. I like to think of it as being similar to safety, as was also stated. No one wants to have an employee, a contractor, or a customer injured. I'm going to refer to all these categories in my presentation as a business partner, just so for ease of speaking. While training and personal protection as equipment and safety procedures are all designed to reduce the risk of injury and death, a culture of security is very similar. Every business needs to establish what that culture should be. This is done by establishing values, group norms, expectations for how our business partners will work. We can't expect everyone to behave in a certain manner if they're not aware of what that expectation is. This isn't rocket science. Having a culture of security isn't either, but organizations fail to develop the right culture because they don't foster it. They don't understand the need for it, and they don't communicate it. So what are the benefits of security? Well, first, the obvious one, fewer cyber incidents. When employees are able to identify phishing emails or understand certain websites that are more likely to be malicious, then they're more likely to not click on that link or go to that website. The employee has to think about, just like they think they wouldn't cross a busy street without looking to see if there's oncoming cars. Being able to identify a phishing email and deleting it, that is one incident that wouldn't need a response. And if you assume that it takes about 2 hours of labor to respond to one clicked phishing email and extrapolate that out to the number of emails that any one organization may receive, which could be in the millions, then the associated lost productivity cost would be significant. Not to mention any damage to your systems to your systems. In addition, because of this awareness, the overall risk posture of the company will be lower. And all corporate executives understand cost savings. Cost avoidance is a big piece of that. There's also an increased compliance. There are many statutory regulations that require training and testing of employees to ensure that they understand their cyber capabilities. These requirements effectively mandate that the organization has that culture of security. And then finally, the right culture helps build an engaged workforce. Employees who understand this will gain personal satisfaction that they did their part in stopping a hacking event. They may have identified a phishing email that was intended to have a payment sent to the wrong bank. I have personally seen the reaction of an employee when someone was told that they did just this, and we thanked them, and they ended up saving us a significant amount of money. Finally, people will realize that this behavior at work will also manifest itself in the right behavior at home. And while some people may not value what they do at work as much as they do in their personal life, being more aware and protecting their personal banking information or their online application or their access to their pictures or files is what they do care about. So if they practice good behaviors at home, they're likely to practice the same behaviors at work. And that's the mindset that we want to foster. So, regulatory requirements. Cybersecurity is as much as an art as it is a science. There are various regulatory authorities have mandated cybersecurity controls and practices to protect sensitive data. This is part of that science. Implementing controls, technologies, processes to ensure we meet the regulations. This also establishes that the organization has met their fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, their customers, their investors. For those on the call from senior management who may be on a board of directors, you know you have this responsibility to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. When we look at regulations such as the European General Data Protection Act or the GDPR, you won't see a requirement that calls for a culture of security, but you will see requirements for training of your employees. In some cases, testing of their understanding and requiring a process to review when we have a process breakdown. All of this reduces the risk of reoccurrence of an event. I know we have people on this call from all over the world, and if you look at your country's privacy or data protection laws, many are built on or are similar to GDPR. Accordingly, if not all, most will require the same types of training and testing and understanding. Now, while it is widely known around the world that the United States does not have one global encompassing national privacy policy like GDPR, we do have industry-specific regulations, including HIPAA, the Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. We have Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act for financial services organizations. And then our various states also have their own regulations around privacy and reporting of data breaches and protecting consumer information. Regulations also go well beyond privacy. There are laws across the world around protection of data, ensures the stability of a country's unique culture. So we can clearly see that the need for a business to have the right culture of security is supported by various laws and regulations, depending on where you do business. And very often, larger companies have to follow the laws and regulations of many countries, making it more complex. So as we think about cyber hygiene, as I mentioned, I specialize in building new programs. And for anyone who is in that stage or is thinking about implementing a cyber program, the very first activity that needs to be done is to ensure the organization has good cyber hygiene. No different than the actions we take every day to keep ourselves healthy, especially during these days of COVID. All organizations must have good cyber hygiene. From my perspective, not ensuring this could mean that the organization, senior management, and the board of directors are not meeting that fiduciary responsibility, because these are the basics. These are the foundations of cyber, and without this, nothing else will work right. So cyber hygiene starts with establishing the right policies, ensuring individuals have access to the systems and the data that they need to do their job, but no more than that. Employing the right types of technologies for authentication and access to the systems and the data. Separating more sensitive systems from other systems, changing your network structure. That helps protect your data and your systems. Use of encryption, antivirus, or now endpoint protection technologies. Patching and updating your software, and then finally, that security awareness program, which ensures your employees understand what they need to do. These are all the foundations. And while they may seem like there's a lot there, these are day-to-day activities that all organizations do. It's more about the how they do it that ensures they do it right. And so while it's important to note that not all organizations are the same in size and risk and have the same capital means, you can implement these in one form or another that meets your business goals. And yet we still have to meet that fiduciary responsibility. As I said, this is not about the what, but more about the how. And I know that while cyber professionals tend to be technical geeks, we tend to learn to be, we all need to learn to be creative. And how we do that, how we balance cyber with business needs. This is why we don't want to require too much security. We don't want to require too little. This is where the art comes in to cybersecurity, finding that balance. So saying all that, how do we actually do this? How do we build that culture of security? So I like to think of it as the old adage of crawl, walk, run. Changing a culture doesn't happen overnight. And if we try to do everything at once, we will likely get nothing done. Because most likely your cyber team or your cyber person or your IT person has many other things to do all going on at the same time. And so we have to plan this out right. And so we're going to discuss these three phases of crawl, walk, run over the next few slides. So how do we crawl? We first need to acknowledge that there is a need to have that culture. Hopefully after listening to Andy's presentation and the material so far, everyone would understand that there is a need between the regulations, the risks, the changing landscapes. Very often, different people in the organization will understand this. But by meeting with leadership and other key stakeholders, you can begin to inform people about why this is needed. Then once it's done, establish that vision for what the end state will look like. Doing this and being laser focused on achieving that vision will help direct how the journey will go. I would also say that it is important to realize it doesn't happen overnight. We can't look at this as a project or a race that will finish in 30 days or after 500 laps. People are not technology. You will likely fall back one step as you move forward too. And what I mean by this is that as you explain the need, some people hearing you will understand that. Others who thought they understood it might actually become confused. This is just human nature and human communications. So we need to communicate differently to have different forms of needs by our consumers, our employees. The second phase, or the walk, is where the real work is done. First, you have to start at the top of the organization. Andy talked about this extensively in his slides. The culture only changes with the board of directors and senior management support. Because you have identified the need and determined why there's a need, you can begin talking to the board or senior management about why. There is a recent news article that discussed the ransomware event that targeted a multinational utility. This article stated that the World Economic Forum has stated that security is the most effective when it begins with organizational leadership. The World Economic Forum also stated, and I quote here, "Only the board of directors can instill the cultural shifts and motivate the organizational shifts that must take place to ensure cyber resilience," end quote. So clearly, having management understand what the culture should be and agreeing with that will make the rest of the change much easier. My personal experience is that when management and or the board is asking about cyber, then they already understand the need. We don't have to sell it anymore. If your organization is not asking, then you may have a challenge. So I like to explain what the business risks is related to the different types of cyber events. When I talk to a board of directors and senior management, if I can use the misfortune of others who have been hacked, it makes it real, especially if it's within the industry that I'm in. If you can find examples that actually relate to the change that you're trying to target, maybe there's a specific type of an event you're working on, then that makes it even better. And then obviously, because senior management and the board is aware of this, they're going to want to ensure that that doesn't happen to them, or that they ensure that you're getting the support you need to address the risk. Comes back to that fiduciary responsibility. If you do your job right, they should be supporting it. Now, after you have leadership support, you need to determine how you will reach your target audience. People like to communicate over different channels. Those who are in their 20s and 30s are more likely to look for podcasts, videos, and some content on the web. Those of us with a few more gray hairs are more likely to respond to email communications, news articles, or in-person briefings. So develop your marketing plan for how you will reach your different audiences. Also consider their roles in the company. Individuals who work in the field, maybe it's in a retail establishment, they have limited time in front of a computer. You may need to have a shift supervisor brief the staff along with the briefing content that you need. If your company has a corporate communications group, then one that focuses on internal communications, then reach out to them for assistance. They know how best to communicate inside the business. I like to think about it, if you do the shopping for dinner, go find the groceries in the store, they will help prepare the content or the meal. Let them be the chefs on that. We in IT are notorious for not communicating well, so ask for help. Don't have pride in that. It's leveraging the resources of the company. And if you even tell or want to tell senior management that you intend to ask communications for assistance, this will help ensure additional level of support from those individuals and help you measure how serious management is. In addition to the various forms of communication, you will need to consider what other tools you will need. Based on risk, I find starting with training on phishing emails to be one of the best ways to get started. Send phishing email tests to your business partners. Track the click rate. Educate those who click. Maybe show a web page that says this is what they should have seen to have identified as a phishing email. Then for the individuals who repeatedly click on these tests, mandate maybe more formal training. The security manager or the individual in the team may also make various presentations. Get in front of your employees and discuss the threats and what the risks are to them. Teach them. Talk to them about how this helps them at home and it protects what they care about. Again, if they have the right behaviors at home, they will more likely have the right behaviors at work. The more visible you are, the better. And then refer them to your website. Have the content available for them to seek out when they need it. Keep that website updated. And then in the run stage, how do you know you're in the run stage? Well, you'll find signs of all your hard work will just show up in front of you and you'll be surprised they're even there. You might be doing your phishing testing on a regular basis. The results should show the effectiveness of the program. You might be able to show the leadership how each department is doing and make it a friendly competition. Very often companies start phishing tests and they're in that 50, 60% click rate. But within 3 to 6 tests, that rate can be well under 5%. Those are very common statistics. That's a measurable impact on how your culture is changing. You can also measure the number of reported phishing emails to the security team if you tell them to go and do that. This is another great metric as to how well the average employee is questioning what they receive in email. Maybe consider doing a raffle or provide a small gift, maybe even a gift card to the local coffee shop. Whatever works in your culture to recognize someone who reported an actual phishing email that prevented a potential cyber event. These things acknowledge people's success and people feel good about that. Another indication could be when the people detect possible banking fraud type phishing emails. Very often a hacker will try to have the banking information changed to the bank account that they want to use. They'll send a phishing email, people will go and just make the change. Most often we see this these days where the third party has already been hacked. The hacker is in the employee's email mailbox, just like the employee is, and they send the email out from John or Susan, and you're expecting an email from them. And so when you see them, it says, hey, we've updated our banks, please change the account. Very often a finance person will do that. But when that finance person sees a bank that might be in some foreign country, in a country you don't do business with, a culture of security will turn it and say, let me question, why is that the case? They may call you, they may call the vendor, you may have them call the vendor. And if that vendor comes back and says, no, we didn't send that email, our banks have not changed, that's a home run. That employee is going to be feeling so good that they questioned it because they may have saved a significant amount of money in an unauthorized payment. That's what you want to see. You want to see your employees coming to you versus you coming to them. So these are just some examples and some metrics about how to measure that security just happens. And remember, you always have to continue the education. Continue to do phishing tests. Continue to update web content. To do periodic presentations. That's what's going to keep this in front of people's minds, no different than we do with our safety programs. Education is the most effective way of developing that culture. And be careful, you don't want to fall into where you punish employees for doing the wrong thing. People very often want to remove access because someone clicked on a real phishing email. That's the wrong thing. People who repeatedly make the mistake on the phishing test, don't punish them, educate them, be supportive of them. That's what gets you there. There may always be that one employee who just doesn't want to listen. You may ultimately need to have a negative performance issue, but that should be the last resort. And so in conclusion, remember, change is a journey. It will not happen overnight. Your employees will change, your staff will change. You will have to have your marketing plan documented and updated as part of your cyber strategy. review that with the effectiveness of the program and modify it as needed. And this concludes my formal remarks. I think we'll be moving into the Q&A session from here, so I turn it back over to Jamilia and Johanna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was wonderful. Yes, we have a bunch of questions. First, two questions that sort of relate to each other, and they're really questions I think that would be good for both of you. One revolves around why a cybersecurity manager needs to directly report to CEO. This is something obviously both of you have covered in your presentation. I think they would like to hear a little bit more about that. Does it enhance cybersecurity strength? What is the relationship of it with a reduction in risks? And a second question is, once you've convinced your audience of that, what do you do if the board of director and senior management is not all in? How do you convince them? What are some strategies for convincing them?
Sure. Andy, do you want to start with the first one or you want me?
Okay, sure. I'll take it, Chris, and then we'll go on from there. I think all I would say is, to keep it brief, is that the same types of conflicts of interest that could exist between the head of security and the CIO, who's in charge of running IT and delivering new products and services to the company, could exist with other positions as well that are below the CEO level. CEO is responsible for everything, right? All the different departments, the different functions of the company. It's quite possible that the risk and the behaviors that the security person might identify that are putting the company in danger are things that someone else in a senior position considers quite important, and something they're not going to stop doing. They're going to do more. And so really the reason I say CEO is twofold. One is they're the best arbiter of those decisions about how to weight one activity versus the risk that might be associated with it, and what types of remediations and adjustments are acceptable. The second thing is that the CEO, more than anybody, needs to be aware as quickly as possible of something that is potentially extremely threatening to the company. If that has to go through a bureaucratic process to go up through one stage of approval to another level of approval, and it might not even reach the CEO, and if it does, the event may have already happened and it may be too late to have a really good response. So for those two reasons, being an arbiter of conflict between the different positions that might differ from the security person, and also the speed of getting that communication to the ultimate decision maker, that is my case for sometimes having the security person linked to the CEO more closely. Chris.
So, and I'm not going to disagree with what Andy's saying there. I think if you could report to the CEO, you have some opportunities. But what I would say is, and I'll use up my examples from my personal experience, you don't have to. It does depend on the culture of that organization. I've seen situations where the CEO and the CIO said, "You're my cyber person. I trust you. Get it done. Tell me what you need." And if they are truly supportive of you, you can be a director. You could be on maybe even the manager in the smaller cases, but you need their support. I found in a situation I was in one time at a new company, and a cyber event came up on an internet-facing device, and we were concerned about a hack on that. I told my team, shut it down. They said, what? I said, shut it down now until we know what we're dealing with. And they did. And then I went and told the CIO, who I reported to at that case. And I said, I don't know if I overstepped my bounds, but I'm telling you I needed to do it to protect the company. And she said, absolutely, that's what you need to do. And I knew from that moment, within a month and a half on the job, that we had the support we needed to do what we had to do. If you're not in that situation, then you need to decide if that's the right company for you. Now, regarding if the board and the senior management doesn't acknowledge or agree with your position and the culture that you're trying to build, you need to question first, are you raising the right argument? Did you make it a persuasive argument? And then understand that they're making business decisions for the company, you're one advisor to many advisors coming to them. The CEO has to ultimately say, what's the culture going to be for us? And you might be taking an extreme position in some cases, and you may not always get it. I've not always gotten what I've wanted in all cases. I tend to get most of what I need because I do it based on risk. And so when you bring that to them based on risk, you tend to be more successful at getting the investments or the technologies. But be creative. Don't think you need the most expensive, the shiniest gadget that's out there. Address the problem and show responsibility in how you decide what you need to do. And you will tend to earn their trust, and they will support you more going forward.
I think that's a really strong argument why this culture of cybersecurity also is so important, because I mean, relative to a lot of other very expensive bells and whistles, this is relatively low cost and you can really reduce your risks. So exactly. I think there's a strong argument for this particular stepping stone in the whole cybersecurity picture. It's not going to eliminate all risks, but you can get pretty far just with the good cybersecurity culture. Okay, I have another question that's a little bit tricky. What do you do about insider threats, about, how do you say, malicious employees? That's a
Chris, would you be so kind to take that, as I have not had to deal with that directly? You'll be more credible, authoritative.
Sure. This is an interesting question because part of it does depend on where you live around the world and your culture, because there's different ways to attack this kind of a problem. First thing you do have to balance and understand, who are the insiders that could cause harm to your company. When I think about risk assessments within the organization, I look at the applications, the systems that they run on, the data, but also the people. In the electric utility industry, the people that manage the power grid are one of the most critical people we have. So we have to monitor or be looking at what's their risk, what are they doing? And there's different technologies that you can use to ensure that the employees are doing what they need to do. Now, when you get into Europe and some of the privacy rules that are out there on monitoring of employees, this gets challenging. I've had to deal with it in the past, and I know the works councils they don't support monitoring of the employee behavior, but you can train them, you can monitor, you can do some monitoring. You give them the least privileged access that they need, so that's the least amount of work, least amount of harm that they can cause. You maybe look at the process. Maybe certain high-risk transactions need 2 people to sign off on it. That's a way to reduce that someone might make that one command, push that one button that's going to cause harm. So you really have to look at within the organization, what options are available to you. In the United States, we have many more options because we don't have that same privacy concept in our business. We can monitor our employees. We can use technology that says, why is that person copying all that data to a USB thumb drive? We can look at why are they trying to email that out. There's things that you can do that indicate high-risk behavior. At the network side, understand what's normal. When people go to certain shared folders, certain applications, that's what they're supposed to do for their everyday job. When that one computer, that person all of a sudden goes from an engineering computer to a finance computer, that might indicate a problem. So we do have to think about those deep, dark, ugly kinds of scenarios that no one really likes to get into unless you're a cyber professional, cyber geek, and say what can go wrong, and then how do I detect it and how do I protect it? And that's really the challenge. But you got to understand and think about it first, and then work within your country, within your company as to what's the best way to address that. Get creative.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Are there any fairly simple programs that would monitor what folders people are going into?
There are a number of technologies out there that can do that. I'm not going to endorse any one of them, but you can do a search on them. They're all over the world. They're very good technologies. Most corporations use Active Directory. There's technologies that work with the Active Directory login processes. So if you purchase some of those technologies, you might have more information in one place that can help identify what the users are doing And the newer technologies are called user behavior analytics. We all are looking into data analytics technologies. So some of these technologies specialize in what the user does, and it tries to identify what's normal and what's not. Just do a search on user behavior analytics, you'll likely find all sorts of examples in this case.
Great, thank you very much. Do you have any sort of, just quickly, a summary of the kind of cybersecurity threats that are typical in the power industry? Because everything we've talked about is, of course, applicable to the power industry, but we weren't really getting into some of the threats that are specific to that industry, to our industry.
Yeah, so I would first say I've been doing this well over, as I mentioned, 20 years in manufacturing and utilities. Fundamentally, all of the attacks are very similar in nature. It's just a different technique that they've used. So that doesn't really change industry from industry. What we are seeing different are attacks that come out of the supply chain that target the vendors that supply products to utilities. Those are the areas that we need to be thinking about. And that goes for whatever industry you're in. Who's making your products? How do you know that they're going to do what you need them to do? You have to have a supply chain program, quality. It's no different than quality of any other product you acquire. You want to make sure it's going to do the job it's supposed to do, but you also want to make sure it's not going to do something it shouldn't. So that's probably the biggest risk these days, is looking and understanding your supply chain.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll take one last question and then say goodbye. What about programs, or I guess programs, yeah, that would trick utility staff on their knowledge of what's safe and what isn't? Sort of testing emails, I guess, or trap emails to see who's paying attention to the trainings?
Yes, there are products out there. They tend to be the same products that might do your web email gateway products, those vendors that prevent spam from coming in there and try to block viruses from coming in there. They tend to offer a service that just does just that. There are pre-canned phishing emails that you can select and use to target your employees for your training. They tend to give you the average click rate of their customer base. So if the click rate is a 10% click rate and you're at 5 or 7, you're doing better than their industry customers. If you're at 15, then you have some rooms to improve. So look at first, who's protecting your emails from when they come in to start with, because they probably offer that service. But phishing test, you just search on phishing testing tools, and you will find a number of tools out there that are available internationally.
Okay, great. Well, with this, I'm going to conclude our webinar for the day. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us and for answering our poll. And we look forward to seeing you in September for the next series of webinars on cybersecurity.